for complete lists, I've been updating my 1/2 inch and just finished out my 3/8 T-handle and breaker bar comparison videos. Been many years, more than 5 years since I did those videos. Added quite a few breaker bars and a few less sliding T-handles. With the 1/4 inch, I've only added a few, and so I'm deciding to try to consolidate it like I did last time with my 1/4 inch video. Is basically everything all in one. So I only have 3 speed wrenches. To tell you the truth, in this case, this little Craftsman here, V series, is actually nice and thick. We can see the rod is, when you cut a square out of a round rod, the round rod needs to be larger than the distance across the squares. And this Craftsman actually runs pretty smooth. Really like the knurling on the handle. And the thick rod, it's actually pretty rigid. And I mention that because I actually kind of lucked out here. These I managed to have picked up both the old Proto and then, or the old Plum, and then the Proto 4780. So the exact same part number, just before and after Proto, they changed their name to Proto. And we can see one difference, surprisingly enough, is when they went to the Proto, they actually extended, gave you about another inch, and they kind of modified the back end. It was really pretty tiny right here on this, and they expanded it just a little bit. Otherwise, same type of knob. It's just, as we can see down here, they're a little bit thinner, and you can feel the springiness of them. Admittedly, I don't use 1/4 inch speed wrenches that much, and oddly enough, I should probably try to find more, is I have only one little kind of like funky, came with some piece of furniture, 1/4 inch L wrench. Getting through these, I bought this really extra long 1/4 inch breaker bar, and I actually ended up breaking the anvil on it. And so I had some other anvil from something, like yet another breaker bar that like had a stripped out screw, and so I put its anvil in here. So this is my ultra long length with a very mismatched handle. Crescent had these, I think that's what it is, yeah, Crescent had these like still pretty long 10-inch handle breaker bar. Kind of cheesily made, pretty sharp on the inside edges, but nonetheless. Also, the anvil has a recess for a centering detent, but they didn't put one in there. The forks are really tall, but they're just, it's almost like it was a forging for a little 3/8 and they kind of threw a 1/4 inch in there. Not really, but nonetheless, it was kind of funky and kind of hard to find larger size versions of these. Digging through random ones, this is just a little basic Lowe's Cobalt. Stubby, but it's actually pretty stout. Of course, one of the Craftsman I-beams. This is one of the earlier unbranded ones, Western Forge. And then this one was really interesting because nowhere on it is there any kind of branding whatsoever. Phillips head screw, but it actually has a pretty wide flared base on that anvil. Does have a centering detent, but pretty decent, pretty strong, really nice knurling on there. They even sunk the bore for the through hole. No sharp edges there, and so I was really just surprised about this one because it's really well made for having absolutely no branding on there. We have an old diamond logo SK, can't deny that. Have this one, which is a very old Plum, 4766, back when they used hot rivets. See, this is one of the weaker ones where it's just a piece of 1/4 inch square stock with a hole drilled through it, and the problem with that is, of course, the walls get very thin, and many times on these, it's actually the anvil breaks right across there, right at the thinnest part. That's why you want ones that have flares like that, because it deals with the situation, or deals with that issue. But nonetheless, it is cool to have this one, and via the logo and this big Made in USA, big letters, leads me to believe that this is probably one of their earliest or earlier tools, that's for sure. I have this one which just says Made in USA. Oh, I forgot this. Another one. Thought I had a couple. I certainly have a few Made in USA tools that don't have a branding, but this is an old Husky CM50. Just a decent little 1/4 inch breaker bar. Back when Husky was good. Do have this Indestro 2650. Oddly enough, for the, as much as I really liked this handle and actually was pretty excited and stoked to have found an Indestro quarter-inch breaker bar, I was still disappointed that they just, once again, did not have a flared anvil, and has a really strong detent. Nice taper, real thick cross-section at the bottom of the forks. And I kind of suppose that this one might hold up a little bit better because the forks have less likely to splay apart, but nonetheless, I was a little disappointed that they didn't have a stronger anvil on that one. I'm picking out some of the last of these here. This is a very vintage Craftsman BE series, and I had never seen a BE before. And this was back when Craftsman had the whole angled, kind of like hex style. See? We can even see the base on that one's even a little bit flared. Big hot rivet. Does have a centering detent. Come on. Thin little handle, but with some decent knurling on it. I was pretty stoked to have found that because that is truly vintage Craftsman. What do we have here? I think this is another... It is. So this is another one of those unmarked ones. Never really understood it. Actually seemed to have some decent build quality although a really thin pin that goes through there. It had pretty tight machining. Nice flared anvil there. And just thought, I wonder what this came with. And oddly enough, it just has nothing on it. What do we have here? Oh, I've done this one before, I think. This is the Williams M42A. Really like this. A beautiful smooth taper. A bit more coarse knurling on it. And just a nice wide, nice cross-section there. Nice cross-section there. Nicely flared anvil. This Williams is actually one of my better quarter-inch breaker bars. I think I found this at an estate sale. Then we have my last couple ones. I actually do have a more modern, deep chrome finish Proto Professional. And they certainly did upgrade these newer ones to have extra thick forks and flared anvil, unlike the really old vintage plums. And pretty stoked to pick that one up. I like quarter inch because it's cheap and compact. I do have one old snap on this one here. And there's a little date code if people want to know how old it is. And what can I say? It's a snap-on. It's pretty heavy duty and it's really pretty well made. This was back in the era when snap-on was probably worth what they were actually charging for their tools. Getting into my T-handle, surprisingly enough, I actually have a dozen of these in quarter inch. Somehow, magically, I run into more quarter inch versions of these than just about than any of my other drive sizes, even in 3/8. This was one of the few old school Mastercraft. This is not a pro, but kind of an odd, hard to find tool, the sliding T-handle. And this was a kind of a disappointing one because there is no friction detent in there. The retention balls are really way too far down the rod, so it sticks out like half a mile. And I've liked so many of my other Mastercraft tools, and this has the exact same type of font, but man, just not a super great T-handle there. We have this one, which is... All I know about this one is it said chrome vanadium on it. Once again, the retention balls are a little far inset. Not as bad as that Mastercraft, but there's still quite a bit of protrusion. Nice satin finish on it. It actually does not have a center location undercut, but at least it has a halfway decent friction spring in there, and I thought, oh, pick that up. But they tell you what material it is, but absolutely no branding. Do have this one, which I think is an old plum, and it is. Oddly enough, I've been able to find a plum and proto versions of a lot of simple tools like breaker bars and T-bars. Not sure how that worked out. This does have a very light center detent, but more than enough, and actually a really strong friction ball on the head. And we can see the bearings are really close to the very ends of the handles, which is exactly what you want. That way they have less protrusion, and we can see just by my finger, really small head on this old plum. Really do like that. Was pretty stoked to have picked that up. And actually I do have, if we can find the logo here, the proto brother, newer brother to it. Similar design language, small head, you know, balls close to the rods, same undercut. They're actually the same length. I think the only real difference is, no, even the head height. Well, it's a little bit taller on this newer one, and of course, a deep satin chrome finish. But I always have kind of liked those. Have this one, which I thought was really odd. I think we do. I think this is a Walden. It is. So this is an old Walden, and really oddly, they have a ball retention there, but then they just did knurling on this end, and I kind of preferred if they just do knurling on both sides. Anyway, cool old short little Walden. Kind of a hard to find tool. Do have this neat guy. This is a very old school Bonnie, but we can see it has the CV logo indicating the chrome vanadium tool steel. No undercut. Come on, camera. No centering undercut, but still decently strong bar. Decent bearing retention. It does have a friction detent in the head, or a friction bearing spring loaded. Not super strong, but still just fine, especially for an old school Bonnie, which are kind of hard to find. I have this one, which I believe may be one of these totally unbranded. Yeah, so... Oh no, it's not unbranded. Oh, this is an old Durochrome. Pretty heavy duty. Stout piece of steel there. I think this one has the thickest handle of all of them. Even if we compare to like the more modern Proto, we can see that this Duro, trying to earn their name, this is a handle that wouldn't bend on you. They also did this interesting where we have a ball on one side and then a single-sided pinch on the other. Don't really understand why that is done. Decent amount of friction, and just overall a pretty stout little 1/4 inch sliding T-handle. Getting further into it, we have, I think this is an old Pennons. No, this is an old Giller. Really deeply hollowed out head, but that allowed them to put in a kind of a special pin. We can see the shape is a tapered and then has a flat. So this has the advantage of the stop being set so that the bar retracts all the way into the head, just totally flush. Really kind of like that design. And because of the large diameter of the ring, I'm pretty sure it still maintains a great deal of its strength. And just thought that was kind of cool. Just an old Giller, which has a slightly different design that allows it to get really into very tight spaces and not have like a stub interfering with you at all. One of the few genuine New Britain branded tools, so I do have an old school New Britain. They do have like this recess that's knurled, so it kind of helps keep the anvil straight if you have like extensions or something on it. No undercut, surprisingly enough, centering. But one thing I was noticing is it was pretty thin right through these sections here. And I kind of wonder that if this one were to fail, I kind of have the feeling that the head would actually split right along there, just because they took a lot of material out of there. Even though the force is causing it to want to split, is you putting so much twisting force that the round bar is trying to pop it apart, so it's more tinsel rather than shearing loads. But nonetheless, I thought they went just a little deep there. Other than that, not a lot else to say besides the neat old New Britain. What else do we have here? Is this another... No, this is the Thorson brand. So that you'll notice that looks very similar to this Giller, because Thorson was like... Giller was Thorson's like commercial or contract branded tools. And so the Thorson is essentially the very same unit. Maybe slightly thicker walls here. That's the only thing I can really say. But it's kind of neat to have both the Thorson and Giller branded ones. And I think I have, yeah, here we go. We have an old Craftsman V series. And then this, I think that's a Craftsman. No, this is an Armstrong. It just kind of has that off gray chrome plating that many Craftsmans use. So this is my old Craftsman V series. Not a lot to say about it. Although this was pretty decent. Pretty thick, strong head. Pretty stout slide bar or T-bar. And then here, of course, I do have this Armstrong. Another one that I was stoked to have picked up. pretty nice, although the friction detent is not quite as strong as some of these others. And I was a little disappointed by how far out the little bar was sticking, but those are some minimal caveats to have a neat old Armstrong. And I'm sure this Armstrong will end up being one of the strongest ones. But those are kind of the basic styles. You either have just really thick bar, thick head, overbuilt ones like an Armstrong. You have the Protos, which are plenty strong, but focus on being more compact. And then you have the ones like the Thorson, which is designed to be, although I guess if we take a look here, no, this Thorson would still fit in a tighter space than this Proto, even though it has a smaller head. So anyway, thanks for watching and sitting through these kind of update the comparison videos, just because they're kind of fun and not a ton of people do them on YouTube. So I like to kind of add my 2 cents. And do like collecting 1/4 inch. I got a dozen sliding T-handles and just a nice little handful of tools. Although it's odd to think about that the retail price on all 12 of these is probably adds up to a fair amount if adjusted for inflation and everything. Anyway, really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. See you next time.